Ancient Egypt is famous for its pyramids, colossal temples, hieroglyphs, and powerful pharaohs. It's one of ancient history's most recognizable civilizations. But thousands of years before the first pyramid arose in the Nile Valley, and before Egypt became a unified kingdom, the surrounding deserts were home to communities whose beliefs and traditions may have helped lay some of the foundations of later Egyptian culture. In this video, I'm talking about the fascinating prehistoric landscape of Nabta Playa, who built it, what its monuments may have meant, and why excavations at this remote desert basin and others have changed our understanding of the cultures that existed long before ancient Egypt emerged. It's easy to think of ancient Egypt as a civilization that suddenly appeared fully formed, complete with its pyramids, temples, elaborate religious beliefs, and a highly organized society. But civilizations don't emerge overnight. The Egypt of the Pharaohs was the product of thousands of years of cultural development, and much of this likely took place outside of the Nile Valley. Back then, the deserts east and west of the Nile looked very different from the barren landscapes we see today. During the final stages of the African humid period, grasslands, seasonal lakes, and shallow basins still provided enough water to support communities of nomadic and semi-nomadic pastoralists. As the climate gradually became drier, these groups continued to move across the landscape, adapting to a changing environment. Pockets of water still existed, and they were able to exploit these. What they left behind offers a rare insight into their world. Across the deserts, archaeologists have discovered thousands of rock carvings and paintings depicting animals, people, boats, and scenes that were probably symbolic. While their exact meanings are often impossible to determine, some of these images may reflect ritual beliefs and ceremonial practices that foreshadow aspects of the much more complex religious traditions that later evolved in dynastic Egypt. The further back we travel into prehistory, the harder it becomes to reconstruct how people lived. Archaeological evidence is often fragmentary, and changing environments can bury, destroy, or obscure things. The harsh conditions in the desert also make it less accessible to fieldwork. Yet, thanks to decades of research in Egypt's western desert, archaeologists are gradually piecing together a fairly detailed picture of life during the Neolithic. One site in particular has attracted enormous attention over the years: Nabta Playa. It's located in southern Egypt, 100 kilometers from Abu Simbel, and is best known for its stone circle and megalithic alignments, which some researchers believe may have had astronomical significance. But Nabta Playa wasn't an isolated settlement. It formed part of a much larger prehistoric landscape known as the Kisaiba-Nabta region, where numerous archaeological sites have been discovered around ancient playas. These were seasonal lakes that filled with water during wetter phases of the early Holocene. Nabta Playa itself was a vast internally drained basin that periodically flooded between roughly 11,000 and 4,500 years ago. During these wetter periods, the basin created a rich environment that attracted groups of pastoralists who established seasonal camps along its shores. These communities herded cattle, used pottery, and returned to the area year after year as part of a mobile way of life. Over time, however, these settlements became larger and more established. As the climate became less predictable, people adapted by digging deep wells that provided access to water throughout the year. They built hut dwellings, made flint tools, and developed distinctive local pottery traditions, suggesting increasingly permanent ties to the region. Then, around 6100 BCE, sheep and goats began appearing in the archaeological record. This shift was likely a response to the drying climate, as smaller livestock were better suited to a more mobile lifestyle and could survive in increasingly arid conditions. Sometime during the Middle Neolithic, it's thought that Nabta Playa started to function as a ceremonial meeting place during the summer wet season. Evidence for these large gatherings has been found on the northwestern shore, where there are hundreds of hearths many cattle bones, and a lot of other cultural debris. The pastoralists of the region mostly kept cattle for their milk and blood rather than their meat. However, occasionally it seems they feasted on cattle, and it's likely this was because of an important occasion in the ritual calendar. In the late Neolithic, a new group arrived in the area. They practiced much more complex rituals, which included the burial of cattle in clay-lined and roofed chambers, which were then covered with stone tumuli. A wadi, meaning a now dry river valley, leads into the north of Nabta Playa. Along the western rocky bank of this wadi, archaeologists have identified 10 of these tumuli and have called this area the Valley of Sacrifices. Buried in these tumuli, they have found cattle, sheep, and goats, with the largest one containing an entire young cow. Such an animal was, and still is, extremely valuable to a pastoralist, so such an offering would have been very meaningful. Tamarisk found in the roof was radiocarbon tested and gave a date in the first half of the 5th millennium BCE. The cow had been interred with a north-south orientation and was possibly sacrificed in a ceremony designed to ensure good rains. At the end of this particular wadi, a stone circle was found on top of a small sandy hill. This is often referred to as the calendar circle because of its suggested astronomical significance. Much of this site was relocated later, but during the initial investigations, it was found to measure around 4 meters in diameter and was made up of upright slabs that may have been aligned with the rising sun on the summer solstice, an important date for pastoralists because in the Neolithic, the rainy season would have brought water to Nabta Playa at that time. The center of this stone circle had 6 upright slabs set in 2 lines. An organic sample from a nearby hearth was radiocarbon dated to around 4800 BCE. To the south of the Valley of Sacrifices, 30 complex megalithic structures were created by another group of people during the final Neolithic. These tumuli have uprights arranged in ovals on the top of them, which surround recumbent stones in the center. The ovals are oriented north-south. Complex structure A seems to have been the focal point of ceremonies during the final Neolithic. What's interesting about several of these complex structures, including A, is that pits had been dug into them, exposing natural quartzite sandstone table rocks that sat at depths of 2.6 meters. For some reason, these rocks formed through erosion were important to the group who settled there in the final Neolithic. In complex structure A, the pit exposing the table rock had been partially refilled, and a large stone weighing 2 to 3 tons had been placed on the center of the rock. The stone had been worked and resembles a cow somewhat, so may have been used as an offering in place of a real animal. Archaeologists identified 5 alignments of megaliths radiating out from complex structure A, most of which have been carved to create what looked like shoulders. The quarry used to excavate the megalithic blocks used in these alignments has been found and dated to between 4500 and 4200 BCE. A storage area for unused blocks was also found 100 meters east of the quarry. Another radiocarbon date for complex structure E has led researchers to conclude that the megalithic period lasted from around 4500 to 3600 BCE. So that's almost a millennium of this type of ritual activity. Researchers compiled data for the orientations of the 5 megalithic alignments radiating out of complex structure A. They found that for the dates under consideration, the likely targets in the night sky were 3 of the 4 brightest, that is Arcturus, Alpha Centauri, and Sirius. The researchers also identified 2 different time periods when particular alignments would have been possible, which suggests an early interest in the northern sky that was later renewed, perhaps coinciding with more difficult environmental conditions in the desert. 20 kilometers from Nabta Playa sit the 6 Neolithic cemeteries of Gebel Ramlah, where archaeologists have excavated elaborate burials of the prehistoric pastoralists that would have camped, lived, or spent time at the basin. Here people were buried with lots of grave goods, including tulip beakers that were manufactured specifically for burials. Cosmetic artifacts such as stone pallets and stones for grinding pigment were also buried with them, alongside containers made of ivory, ceramic, or stone. That these prehistoric pastoralists had good health and nutrition was determined by the skeletal remains. Efforts were made to preserve the bodies and honor them. Many of the grave goods attest distant trade contacts. For example, turquoise from the Sinai Peninsula, shells from the Nile, mica from mountains along the coast, and ivory from elephants. So what we can see is that cattle, important as it was to these prehistoric pastoralists, was used in feasting before becoming the focus of more elaborate ritual activity. During the late and final Neolithic, an interest in astronomy seems to have become a feature of ceremonial life at Nabta Playa, probably because of its importance to navigation, but also for other symbolic reasons as well. These pastoralists honored the dead, were perfectly capable of quarrying, moving, and directing megaliths, had complex belief systems, and were connected to regions much further afield. There was nothing isolated about pastoral life in the Neolithic. The later ancient Egyptians were particularly interested in the northern night sky, seeing it as the place where the stars never set. They also worshipped the cow goddess Hathor. Could these practices have their precursors amongst the pastoralist communities of these former desert oases? Obviously, we don't know for sure, but it's an intriguing possibility. Among the grave goods at Gebel Ramlah were cosmetic palettes, simple stone objects used for grinding pigments. They bear little resemblance to the richly decorated Narma palette of later Egyptian history, but they may represent an early stage in a tradition that eventually transformed everyday cosmetic tools into some of the most incredible ceremonial objects of ancient Egypt. If you haven't seen it already, I also did a video recently on monumental burials in the Atbai Desert to the east of the Nile. Let me know what you think about Nabta Playa in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.